Let's Talk is brought to you by the StarQuest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give. You're listening to Let's Talk, the SQPN community podcast. Hi, I'm Don Bettinelli, and today we're discussing Civil War history. You'll notice that it's not Father Corey Steeka this week. Father Corey is, I like to say he's on assignment. I haven't assigned him anything to do, but he's on a priest retreat that his bishop has assigned him to go on to, and he asked me to take over this week, so I'm behind the microphone for him. And joining me today on Let's Talk are Mike Creevy. Hi, Mike. How are you?
Hey, good, Dom. How are you doing?
Very good, thanks. And Dr. Jim Bigley. Hi, Jim. Welcome.
Hi, Dom. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. So, folks, if you've been around SQPN for a while, you probably remember Jim from the Secrets of Harry Potter podcast that he did with Father Roderick von Hogen a couple years ago. But, Jim, you have a day job that's related to today's topic. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do for a living that makes you connected to our topic today about the Civil War?
I'm a director of educational technology for a local Catholic high school here in central Pennsylvania. But my other, I guess, a side thing that I do is I do a lot of work with helping teachers integrate technology into the teaching of social studies with a particular interest in the American Civil War, seeing as how I live about 40 minutes north of Gettysburg.
Yes, and that's actually really the approximate reason we're talking about this is you live about 40 minutes north of Gettysburg. Mike, I gather you told me you live about 40 minutes north of...
Jim and I might be neighbors. I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm in Camp Hill, just near Harrisburg, so we're not too far apart, I guess, one way or the other.
My son can probably run to your house. So,
well, that's pretty awesome. The magic of podcasting. Well, and I don't live near Gettysburg, but I live near Boston. But my family and we took a vacation to Gettysburg this past July, which, as we'll get into, we'll talk about some of this. That was the wrong time to go. I didn't consult with Jim before going and made a bunch of mistakes. And so you all will get to learn from my errors, and Jim will give us some great pointers. But Mike, you also have some interest in the Civil War, correct?
Yeah, well, growing up, I guess, just around Gettysburg, and we traveled a lot into Maryland and Virginia, a lot in D.C. area, and that's really the heart of it, and Gettysburg, of course, being probably the most famous battlefield. So I guess that interest was always there. And I had a sort of in general American history interest, most especially kind of early American history. And when it came time for my senior history thesis, in my undergraduate at Catholic U in D.C., they didn't have anything yet for like colonial era. So It started off as like the closest thing I could get kind of was like Civil War and Reconstruction. But along the way, it just really kind of rekindled that passion, and I ended up studying stuff that I hadn't really ever looked into before, specifically Confederate partisan warfare. So that was just kind of a cool, I sort of just decided to pick something I didn't really know much about because I knew it would force me to really, dedicate that time and not make any assumptions and everything. So it was a fun year kind of doing that for my sort of culminating thesis in my undergrad. So it's always been an interest of mine, but that was probably my most intensive kind of, study in one particular area.
So that's interesting. That's interesting because, my doctoral dissertation is on how teachers use technology to teach the American Civil War. So it's like really interesting that your thesis is on the Civil War and the history, and mine is too. So and we live 15 minutes from each other.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
I mean, for myself, I've always loved history. My dad imparted a love for history in me. But because I grew up in the Boston area, most of my interest has been really in the Revolutionary War because all those sites are right here around me. And I knew about the Civil War, of course, and then a lot of my interest around World War II and Korea because I had uncles and my dad who were served then. So these places and times were the ones that really appealed to me. But the Civil War was just sort of in the background there. But when my family and I, we were on a. This is how we ended up going to Gettysburg. We were going on a family vacation last year, driving to Kentucky for my wife's family reunion. And on the way back, we're like, where should we stop? What's kind of a partway point between the Great Smoky Mountains, which was our last stop and home. And we said, oh, well, Gettysburg's kind of right there in the middle. We should stop there. And then my wife's dad had spent, a few years ago, had spent about a year watching the movie Gettysburg over and over and over again. If you knew my father-in-law, you'd understand. And so she was, because she had to endure that. So she was sort of interested in stopping in. And then my son got sick on the trip and we couldn't stop there. So we said, we've got to go back. And so we went back this past summer and it was fascinating. I loved it. And the kids were really interested in it. And now I want to find out more. But I want to throw this question to you is why should people today, 21st century Americans, and maybe perhaps our audience, Catholic Americans, most of our audience would be, why should we study the Civil War? Why do you guys think that it's relevant to people today? Even just as history, but specifically the Civil War. What do you think?
I think it was Jim. I think it was just aside from the fact it was a defining moment in our country's history. We completely split down the middle and, over the issue of slavery. And, it was just, and it sort of really formed our country. And there's a lot of things that came out of the Civil War that developed our, modern culture, from, the innovations in battlefield medicine, naval warfare. They went from, you talk about the American Revolution, they were a lot of standing in straight lines and firing each other. And, the Civil War developed new war tactics and how people were trained, and, just the technologies that were invented, and, the railroads and how they were used, and communications, and, just little things like those that, just aside from the wars and the battles, there's all these little side things that you can explore and learn about that really have an impact on where we are today.
Well, yeah, and I would agree. And I think also what always really fascinated me, I think more than probably anything, is the relationships, especially between, there's so many we'll never even know about, quite frankly, but the relationships between some of the figures like Hancock and Armistead and many, many others, where a lot of these guys, a lot of the generals, a lot of leaders, who had gone to West Point together, or who had been in the same units together, and then I was in the Army for almost 10 years, and just looking at it from that perspective, like just imagining like these people that you go through all this stuff with, and then you split,
right?
You're not fighting those guys. It's like you're fighting your classmates, and to see what's really weird to me, and I'm it might sometimes I think it's tricky for us to not look at certain things with rose-colored glasses. I'm sure, like we weren't there, so you can only kind of get it so much. But by the same token, looking at some of these accounts and these the correspondence and that kind of thing, what's funny to me is here you have some of these guys who are like at war with each other, like units pitted against each other, like they're ostensibly going to kill each other on the battlefield, and yet they're more polite to each other and genuine and loving than some of the people like on Twitter, like who like we're not actually shooting at each other or anything, or going to war, but like sometimes the vitriol is so much more. So and it's just weird to me, like that kind of the difference between the stakes. Maybe I don't know. It's a different time too.
Some of these guys went to West Point together. A lot of the commanders, they went to school together, and then when the war broke out, they split off. One side went the other way. So there's lots of stories of how they met up with each other on the battlefield and had communication. Even at Gettysburg, there's a couple of classic examples. That's like even when they were coming up this way, some of the troops had been stationed at Carlisle Military Barracks, which just down the road from us here. They had stationed there, and they went there and they visited old friends that they knew there, which was interesting. Southern troops as they were coming up through the Shenandoah Valley and the Appalachians.
Yeah, it was interesting. So a lot of the officers, they were from the U.S. Army. They were on the same side for many years. A lot of the enlisted, the volunteers, because the Army was pretty small to begin with. I think I saw a number at the beginning of the Civil War. It was about 17,000 regular troops at the very beginning. By the end of the war, the U.S. Army, the Federal Army, was hundreds of thousands, but there were also tens of thousands, or maybe even the majority of the Army was these state militias, guys who signed up, many of these guys who'd never been more than 20 miles from home in some cases, who were now on these battlefields fighting against other Americans with hatred in their eyes. I mean, this was a united country at one point before that, and then very quickly it sort of devolved into two camps, and we need to kill you because you're the other. And it's kind of shocking to see how quickly that happened and how divided we became. Now, obviously, I would guess that if you study it and you read the documents and the primary documents and that's from the time, that it's very clear how this devolved. But from my standpoint, as someone who's just sort of delved into it, it seems it's kind of shocking. I mean, was it that sudden? Was there this sudden divide that just kind of split the country apart? And part of the reason I ask that is because I'm afraid of history repeating itself in our country, frankly. And maybe that's one of the reasons we need to study the Civil War, is to prevent it from happening again. But from your point of view, does it seem like this was a sudden split over? And I say sudden by like over the course of a decade or so. What do you think?
My read on it is it was something. I mean, it depends on how you look at it, I guess. But you definitely see. Give you a movie example. I think that gives a pretty good. I think in terms of just kind of sowing seeds in a sense is the John Adams miniseries. It was on like 10 or 11 years ago or so.
Yeah.
I guess it was based on the David McCullough book, but just some of those earliest, like the Continental Congress, like some of those early conversations, those early decades where you see, certain people bringing up, hey, what about that whole slavery thing? And you see these little threads that are there, and like we of course look back on it, and you read that stuff or you watch movies where that comes up, and it's like, that's going to be an issue. It's not just going to disappear.
That's going to be a problem later,
right? And then. Also the famous Amistad, ship, case, the trial. Spielberg made a movie about that too. I think it was late 1830s, and then some of the sort of budding abolitionist movement and some of those issues. So it's a lot of those seeds I think are being sown as far as the slavery issue is concerned, which is of course at the heart of the whole the states' rights issues.
Right.
That's made probably one of the biggest ones. Of course it's right there in front of everybody. So it definitely doesn't show up overnight.
Yeah, it's you can even go back as far as like the Missouri Compromise, which was, which was what 1820s, 1820. There's slave rebellions going on leading up to it. There's early 1850s Bleeding Kansas. There's 57, 58 Dred Scott decision. Again, all of those things that led up to the that led up to the Civil War.
Do you feel like was the Civil War inevitable in a sense? Not that what I'm trying to say is, was there a point at which the momentum was just too much going in the direction of war that we could have stopped it at the right application of a political compromise? Or was there another option, or was it really like at some point around in the 1850s, or maybe with Dred Scott, maybe at that point it just was too late. It was inevitable that we would at one point or another come to blows over this issue. What do you think? What's your? I know academics have probably debated this ever since, but I kind of feel like that there was from my layman's point of view, my dilettante's point of view, that there came a point where the momentum, and I think this is true in a lot of aspects of American culture, just in general, in political culture, wherever, that sometimes the momentum in a direction gets so strong that even with the strongest leaders, it's hard to change course and to avoid the things. And so it's kind of interesting. And again, I bring this up because of this idea of maybe we should be studying what happened to this, maybe to start the Civil War. And we may not even have to study the battles themselves, although that's interesting. But even just what brought us to Civil War, people today should be studying this so that we don't end up there again over different issues. I'll be honest, one of my great fears is right now in our country, we're so divided and so at each other's throats in such an implacable way where the people who have different political opinions are not merely just different or even wrong, they're evil and must be destroyed. And that is a bad thing for our country. And I wonder if more people understood what led to the Civil War, it could lead people to maybe tone things down or change their attitude. What do you think about that? Am I being too dramatic?
No, and the interesting thing too is, the election of Abraham Lincoln, was sort of the straw that broke the camel's back, some would say. So and there's a lot of that going on even today. That really he was, a strong candidate and whatnot. And it was interesting that, to look at it from that perspective, that was the defining moment.
No,
if you will,
I'm still
really
recording. This is Audacity.
Had someone else
talking
been elected,
about divided America.
Avoided war,
I'm logging back into Skype. I'm not sure why it cut out.
That's a good question.
But we're going to try this again.
Mike, how about you? What do you think? Is this? Are we at one of those moments in our culture where we need to? Are we at one of those moments in our culture where we need to determine what? How to put it? We need to look at the past in order to avoid a similar future. What do you think, Mike?
My Skype just jumped out and I'm back in here, but
Okay.
I wanted to mention that because I don't want it to seem like the moment that you asked the big hard question, I just quit and I split.
Okay, I'm not throwing softballs here, but I have to. No, that's fine. That's fine. Technology.
So I would just say, I guess, just my own personal opinion, shaped also by my time in the military too, for that matter. I think I still like to think that no war is ever inevitable.
Right.
But man, we sure love them. We sure find ways into them, and that doesn't seem to change no matter what the country is or whatever. But I think I don't know that I'm not sure that I really know how to answer that, except to say that maybe for our current situation, I think one of the challenges is, and I don't know if Jim just mentioned this too, but it is very challenging in that it's not so much a sort of geographical thing at this point,
right?
And again, there were people in the North who wanted to secede, and people, it was a little more complicated, in the Civil War, even than just a quick, like I'm above this line or below this line, and that means I believe this thing. But yeah, I wonder about that. Like the Southern culture, quote unquote, was so much more distinctive than Northern. You were able to kind of paint it somewhat
right.
with broader brushstrokes. There were certain things that influenced those North and South kind of halves. So yeah, I'm not really sure what that. I hope we don't ever have to find out. But what that would even look like, today in terms of it's not just a geographical thing, but such a philosophical or political, whatever you want to call it.
Right.
Difference that you can find almost anywhere you go. So
it's almost
seems
urban.
murkier.
Yeah, it's almost urban-rural divide.
Right. Which is harder.
Yeah, and blue and red, that whole thing. So let's move from the theoretical to a little bit more of the historical, and talk a little bit about one of the things that struck me when I was in Gettysburg. We took a side trip over to Emmitsburg, Maryland, which is only about 20 minutes from Gettysburg, and we went to the St. Elizabeth Ann Seton Shrine, which is there. So Elizabeth Ann Seton was the first native-born American saint, and she had founded a community there. Daughters of Charity, I think, was the name at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Now
correct.
Okay.
Of St. Joseph, I think.
Yeah. And but that was decades before the Civil War. She was born around the time of the Revolution. But the sisters, the community at the time of the Civil War, after the Battle of Gettysburg, they made their way to Gettysburg from the shrine, about 8 miles away, about 20 minutes by car, to help with the wounded. And in fact, they have an exhibit at the shrine called Civil War Sisters that talked about how the sisters throughout the South and wherever the battlefields were often the ones who showed up to treat the wounded, and were often the ones relied upon by the medical professionals and the officers to say, okay, the sisters are here. They know what they're doing. Because a lot of time women would show up from the towns, the families, the farms to try to help, but they didn't. they didn't have experience treating battlefield wounds. So the sisters came and treated the wounded. And there's a great explanation that there was the parish and church in Gettysburg itself, St. Francis Xavier, the sister relating how when she went in there were men on every pew and on the floors groaning and wounded, and how they came in and treated them and took care of them. And it was fascinating. So what do you know about the Catholic presence during the Civil War, what Catholics did, not just the sisters, but just every, any regular Catholics? Because I remember there was just to kind of throw in there before I let you respond, there was like an Irish brigade from New York, and that was Irish and therefore Catholic and stuff like that. So what do we know about Catholics in the Civil War, Jim?
Well, to expand on the Daughters of Charity a little bit, at St. Francis Xavier, which is one of the churches, most of the churches in the town of Gettysburg, and a lot of the buildings became hospitals. And, there's stories of surgeons operating right in the narthex. So they pulled out, and that's where they did all of their operating. And then they would go inside to the church to be healed before they were moved to Camp Letterman after the war, or after the battle, to heal further. There's actually stained glass windows inside the church to the sisters, which is really cool. There's a plaque out front that commemorates them. But there's some really cool stories about, like, they had to slow their horses down and move them so they didn't, like, as they were coming north, as they were coming out of Emmitsburg en route to come north, that they had to move their horses so they didn't hit the wounded and dead soldiers and actually step on them, which is really cool too. But at Gettysburg, there's always the story of Father William Corby, who was a priest, with the Irish Brigade. And during the battle of the second day's battle, which is right along the main lines along Cemetery Ridge, he stood on a rock. And because the men hadn't been to mass for a couple of weeks because they'd been constantly marching, he actually stood on a rock and gave the men absolution before they all went off into battle. And there's a pretty famous statue of him standing there with one hand in the air, and it's actually the same statue that's at the University of Notre Dame.
Because he's the Holy Cross Father, yeah.
Yeah, right. So that's a pretty interesting little tie. He
became a president of Notre Dame later, right?
He did.
It was?
Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And they call the statue Fair Catch Corby, right?
Fair Catch Corby, right?
And there's a famous quote from him from that moment. He said something about be courageous.
Amen. Yeah. Go ahead.
I think it was be courageous because cowards don't get to go to heaven or something along those lines. He probably said it more eloquently, but something somewhat theologically suspect perhaps, but something along those lines, calling them to courage.
Well, yeah, call for courage and fortitude. Yeah, I think, and I was looking it up here because I couldn't remember the name of the painting. I think Bradley Schmeel or Schmel, if I'm saying that right. There's a famous painting of Father Corby given the absolution. My uncle has a big original of it on his wall, which is nice. But it's I've always loved that painting. But that's something you see, like the Irish Brigade. Because you had this huge influx of a Catholic population in the few decades leading up to the Civil War. Of course, from Ireland, the potato famine. People have heard of that. I guess also Germany. I think too. That was more. I don't know as economic, but there were German immigrants coming in, and even in our area here, you have some remnants of that. So down in Adams County and parts of York County, so south central, sort of Pennsylvania, you have. You'll have this middle of nowhere, just kind of farming community, or like a little, orchard. It's just out there in the boonies. And then there's this like massive, I don't know if massive's the right word. It depends on who you're saying it to, I guess. But there's a basilica, which is down there that I think was built by German Jesuits, if I remember correctly. But you have early American, sort of Catholic little strongholds here and there. And I don't know if it's partly because of, it's definitely not a Catholic area even to this day. It's overwhelmingly, Protestant or other faiths. But you do have remnants here and there, little pockets, because we're not that far north of Maryland, of course. Right. We're right on the border there. And of course, even here, I grew up in Carroll Township down in York County. It's, Carrolls, like Charles Carroll. You go back to the Carroll family, and you see a lot of Carroll on road signs and stuff like that, down in northern Maryland. who I believe, if I remember correctly, he was the only Catholic signer of the Declaration of Independence.
Right, and his brother was
so-
the first bishop.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So it's there's a legacy, there to some extent, certainly in Northern Maryland. Some of that trickles up to us, and then Elizabeth Ann Seton, with her proximity here, we're very fortunate here in our diocese, the Diocese of Harrisburg. We had, I think, one of the first churches probably in the world named for Elizabeth Ann Seton, also one for Catherine Drexel, but that's another story. And that's actually my home parish growing up of Elizabeth Ann Seton. So she's always been sort of around me in a sense. So I've always felt very close to her. And then I went to Mount St. Mary's for a year as a seminarian about 10 years ago for our diocese. I was there for a year. So, and then now I'm going to be the Catholic high school I'm working at here does a house system they just started, so they have different patron saints, and I just happen to be in Seton House. So
oh, nice.
So I do have that real affinity for for Mother Seton and for her and her sisters, and I do wonder if because of their spirituality, especially in their connection to Vincent de Paul, and all of his fame for charitable outreach and all that kind of thing, that's you can really kind of see that coming through. I think their efforts during that time as well.
Yeah, it was amazing to see the exhibits at the Seton Shrine about. Not just in Gettysburg, but all over the South, where the sisters, there's a great story that's told about one of the sisters is ministering to some guys, and one of the soldiers who's wounded says to the sister, sister, you gave something to that guy, and he got better. I want you to give me what you gave him. And she said, oh, no, I just gave him a miraculous medal. And he's like, well, I want one of those too. And so she said to him, well, I can't give it to you unless you're baptized. A Catholic, you have to be baptized Catholic. Again, somewhat theologically suspect, but okay. But he agreed, and then they managed to get a priest in there, and he got baptized and was given the medal. And we don't know what happened to him afterward, whether he survived or stayed Catholic or what have you. But it's these great stories of the sisters, just by the very fact of being who they are and following the gospel message, we're bringing Christ into these places of battle and where death reigned, but love reigned more. And that was, and it's amazing to see how even as the battles and death and destruction spread out among the states, so did the faith, the sisters especially as a special sign, but many religious of men and women, I think, went out into these places to minister and to bring Christ into the battlefield. So it was really inspiring and fascinating. I'm so glad I got my kids got to see that.
Well, and there's definitely another movie reference that I can't recommend it for younger audiences because it's pretty rough. But if you ever saw Gangs of New York, I think Scorsese did in like 2005 or 6, somewhere in there, and there's that scene where you have like the Irish immigrants getting off one boat and walking up, and like the draft table is like right on the wharf. Right. They're like, "Hi, welcome to the United States. We need you to go to," and they're like looking at each other like, "I'm going to Georgia. Where's Georgia?" And some of these guys, like these Irish, like it was a lot of New York regiments that formed that Irish brigade. That a lot of these guys coming in New York, and they're like, "Hey, go down there and fight." You can't even imagine like what are you thinking at that point? Some of them are getting like enlistment bonuses or whatever. Like there's sometimes an incentive, but by the same token, it's like it does kind of make you think about the stereotype sometimes of like everybody fighting for the cause. Sometimes it's like, how much did maybe this guy even know about, like what he's doing, So that's
some of them didn't even speak the language,
right?
You talk about some of the German immigrants; they didn't even speak. They couldn't even understand, and just sort of, hey, I'm going to sign up to get money and or food from my family. Like you said, I'm blanking on the word, but the sign up bonus, that sort of thing. There's also other Christian groups that were pretty popular during the Civil War, like the U.S. Christian Commission, the U.S. Sanitary Commission, and they've handed out, they provided, small, like the Christian Commission would hand out Bibles and prayer songs and psalm books and things like that to the troops that help them do that. There's some really cool pictures that you can find in the Library of Congress of, mass and church services happening in camp. So people were standing around, looking and watching these services, and they were captured on camera, which is really cool. Which is, an early technology that was developed, during the Civil War. There's no live action battle shots, but you get a lot of the dead or battle scenes or guys in camp. So you talk about, I study it. There's just so much that you can garner from that. When you talk in the Irish immigrants and what influence that they bring into not only our culture, but into how they practice their faith, and how did they do that on the battlefield. And then how did these other groups, again, like the Christian Commission, bringing supplies to the troops? Sometimes they were said that they brought them faster than the Union armies or the Confederate Army, because they were able to get around the red tape, if you will,
right,
and get supplies to the troops, faster than the army.
That actually, I think, extends into modern times. Hearing stories about how the Red Cross would show up ahead of the supply trains for the U.S. Army in Europe sometimes. So,
Clara Barton did that at Antietam, which again is not far from us. She was able to go around and provide supplies, and the work that she did and minister to them. And there's the Dunker Church right there, which is one of the most famous places on the Antietam battlefield. You talk about Lincoln. Lincoln was, you can see it in his writing. He was maybe not devout, but you can hear references to his Christian upbringing in some of his speeches. He attended services in Gettysburg with John Burns and that sort of thing before he gave the Gettysburg Address.
So that the mention of Antietam kind of makes me want to kind of switch gears just a little bit to talk about going to visit Civil War locations, and usually I would guess battlefields would be the main thing. Those places that are preserved today that are probably around battlefields. What would be some of the best places? What should people look for? What are obviously Gettysburg, I think is pretty awesome, and it's one of the most famous. And I gather it's one of the best preserved. My daughter actually was reading about this guy who showed up like within weeks of the battle ending. His name's Batchelder, who was a painter. Yeah, he originally wanted to paint the Bunker Hill battle, but couldn't get enough information about it. And when he heard that there was a battle going down in Gettysburg, he immediately pulled up stakes and headed straight down there from Boston and interviewed many of the people, both from officers to enlisted, who were there on the battlefield, and got some of the most accurate records of what happened and where, that really kind of define the battlefield as we know it today. Is that correct? Am I on target with that?
Yeah, and some of his maps are still used by historians as some of the most accurate of where the troops were at various locations throughout the battle. They're very popular.
So Gettysburg, I would say probably is one of the best places to go if you want to really get a sense of a Civil War battlefield. But what other places could people think about visiting, especially if Gettysburg might be, it's about the furthest north, I think, right? Is that probably about the furthest north of the battlefields, the big battlefields?
Yes.
Well, I don't know if this is, I couldn't help but think of The Office when Dwight references the Battle of Schrute Farms being the actual northernmost, but that's a whole other thing.
That's right.
But there's others there's like, and I haven't been to a lot of them, like Shiloh, Vicksburg, because so many of them happened in like sort of Maryland, Virginia kind of area, but you go to parts of Tennessee or further in the south and stuff, and you see some of those. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep. So I want to get to some of those myself.
Okay, so
I did Fort Sumter, which I wasn't impressed with. Yep. I did.
Oh, really?
I wasn't.
Because they always tell you to go there. That's where it starts.
That's where it started, and I honestly was underwhelmed.
What
made it underwhelming to you? Was it just?
It's we rode the ferry out, which was expensive. And you didn't get a whole lot of time around there, and the docents and the park rangers were not very knowledgeable, and it was just one of those things. Okay, been there, done that. Don't want to go back. Kind of thing.
Okay.
So, what city? What city is Fort Sumter off of?
That's in Charleston, South Carolina.
Okay.
I've been to quite a few throughout Richmond, which throughout Virginia. You can go up and
Appomattox, the courthouse and stuff.
That's one. That is a bucket list.
I have to get there.
Yeah, that's a bucket list one for me. Is Appomattox Courthouse, where it all ended. So I've done the beginning and done the end.
Yeah.
I've done Fredericksburg and some of those other ones down through there, which are really cool.
Well, it might be a little morbid, but I am interested in Andersonville, and I don't know what their setup is like down there. The sort of Confederate, POW camp basically. But it's you see those horrible pictures from it and stuff. It's just that's maybe worth checking out. I don't know.
Yeah, so
maybe not with the kids.
No, I mean I've heard the same thing. I've had some friends that have been there. It's really moving. So Dom, in answer to your question, it's really about what you want to learn about. Barb Sanders, who is one of the leading historians at Gettysburg, said one time that Gettysburg is the Civil War to the world. So if you really want to get a good overview of the battle, and you really want to see what one of the major happenings that took place, to go there. And if you want to have more of a reflective, quiet experience, Antietam is a great place to go. You kind of walk around. You can take a driving tour with like an audio tour like you did with your family, and you sort of experience it yourself. And it's not as busy in some of the other places, and you can start to think about the number of people that were killed there and the actions that took place at that location. So, but it's more, you have to visualize it more. There aren't as many monuments. There's not as many, interpretive markers and things like that. And at an Antietam or some of these other locations where Gettysburg is, as you said, most preserved and most, got the most monuments and everything toward it.
That's the thing that strikes me about Gettysburg is driving through there. There are monuments everywhere to the marking where every regiment was during every part of the battle, including markers for that this was the left flank of the regiment and this was the right flank. And I mean, there's so many monuments. It almost looks like a cemetery in some areas.
Yeah. And every road is a one-way street. No,
yeah, almost. But the roads were built in many places to mark the battle lines, if I recall correctly. And there were also something like 400 cannons, which is nearly the amount of cannons actually were there at the battle. I think it was 600. So I mean, it really feels like the whole place is a giant, monument, a giant educational experience. Couple of things. So a couple of suggestions when you go. And Jim, you helped me with some of this when we talked afterward. If you're going with your family, if you have a big Catholic family and you're going, recognize that everything costs something. So the introductory film costs something. The museum in the park center costs something. So the best thing to do is get an annual membership, even if you're only going to go once, an annual membership for your family to the foundation. The Gettysburg Foundation is going to be less expensive than buying tickets for your family of 4, 5, or 6, or 7. Mine is 7. Which next time I will take your advice, Jim, and do that. So that would be great. The other thing,
right, and not only does that get you into the cyclorama, the movie and the cyclorama, and it gets you into the David Wills House, which is the location where Lincoln spent the night prior to giving the Gettysburg Address.
Yep.
And it gets you discounts in the stores and stuff like that. But you're right. If I bought one. If you go once or twice, even if you're taking a long weekend, or you spent a week there almost. If you're going to go, you might as well go and visit. And it was hot there. The day that you were there, you can go and hang out in the museum.
Yes.
And,
you guys weren't dressed in wool uniforms.
Let me tell you, that was educational to be there in that heat. So we were there, and it was the hottest week of the year, high 90s during the day. And imagining those poor soldiers in their wool uniforms was educational for me and the kids. I tell you, so that actually touches on when to go. So not in the middle of the summer, especially if you're camping like I was. Camping is actually a great way to go to various places, especially if you have a big family. It's much cheaper than several hotel rooms, frankly, or even an Airbnb. But in the middle of summer, it can be hot to sleep, especially.
And crowded.
And, well, actually, it was quite uncrowded for when we were there. So this is the middle of July. The campground was pretty empty. But I gather it's probably really crowded around 4th of July weekend, which is the anniversary of the battle.
And then the following week, right after that, is Bike Week. So they have a lot of motorcycles in town.
Oh, okay.
You see them on the highways going down. Yeah. Well, and I for me personally, I love going in the fall.
Yeah,
I do too.
Because you just the weather's beautiful. Gettysburg is, I mean, the whole area, Adams County is just gorgeous. And there's so much. There's fruit orchards, and it's just a really beautiful place. And if you're whoever's into Halloween, like there's a lot of cool Halloween stuff and all that kind of good. It's just the weather really is best, I think, around that time of year, like late September and late October. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
I think when we go back, we'll probably be in the not this fall, but in a fall time period. That was originally when we were going to go, so that's good to think about.
Fall or spring is a really good time. October or whatnot, and then if you get a chance, you go to the battlefield either like right at sunrise or right at sunset, and especially like you live up on Little Round Top. There's some beautiful. It's just, really chilling to sit there at some of these battlefields. And I've been, at several of them, to sit there and at sunrise or sunset, to see you can see the pictures and whatnot. It's a beautiful experience, and there's not as many people, so you kind of, so you get the battlefield to yourself, but it's a great time to go. It's much cooler. The summer times are when everybody typically does their vacations. If you get a chance too, right around the remembrance of the Gettysburg Address is a cool day to go. It's a one-day event.
That's November, right?
Yep. Yeah. No, right around the anniversary of the speech, and they have a huge parade of Civil War reenactors, and then they'll have a presentation of the Gettysburg Address by an interpreter. And usually a keynote speech and things like that. So it's a nice little weekend. But the parade of Union and Confederate soldiers and fife and drum music all over the place is a great way to go if you want to spend a day trip.
And I don't know. I always like anything like that. For whatever reason, just the smells always get to me. I think it's just like you can smell the wool, you can smell like the campfires, and there's just something really cool and very tactile about going to those. And for the kids, there's always like the little, like show and tell type areas, where they can go and see stuff. And so they do a lot of that. It's really cool.
Yeah. So you talked about, things to do with your family is, if you do a little bit of research ahead of time, typically at a lot of these battlefields, they'll have encampments that you can go and take the kids to see the reenactors that are free, or they'll have walks. If you don't have kids, there's battlefield walks that these park rangers will do that, take you and give you a tour about the battle. And those are always free. There's always things going on at most of these battlefields on weekends. Typically during the week, not as much, but on weekends throughout the summer, Gettysburg is full of them. And a lot of these other battlefields at least have some reenactors around that you can talk to, and kids get up in touch and things like that.
So couple of things to see Gettysburg, you really have to kind of you have to get around. It's a big battlefield. So there's a couple ways to do that. One is they have bus tours. You can buy a ticket for a bus tour, and there's an interpreter and a guide, who's at the front of the bus, and they go to the different locations. You could also hire a guide, and these are licensed
best way to do it.
Guide, and I might do that next time. But it's a person who gets in your car with you, takes you to these places, and will tell you, for you, and answer your questions. And I mean, that's really, and it's not that expensive. I think it's like $80 or $90.
My dad might do it for free if you ask.
Yeah, I would do it for you.
I will take you up on that. And then
you can buy me dinner at the Rourke's or whatever.
There you go. I'll take you to Pickett's Buffet.
Which is right next to where General Pickett, right?
Exactly. I found that the tackiest thing. It's so American. It was so tacky. It was so funny. Pickett's charge is like the most emotional, like amazing, courageous act of bravery and sacrifice. And right next to it is Pickett's Buffet, now a buffet restaurant. I can't imagine. Anyway, but the way we ended up doing it was we got the audio tour guide. So you buy it in the museum bookstore, and it's a guidebook. It's a pretty good guidebook. It comes with a download code for an app. It didn't work. I couldn't get it to work. And I'm a tech guy. I couldn't get it to work. Couldn't get it to download. I couldn't get it to download at home on my good Wi-Fi. But it also had a CD, and luckily we have a car that still has a CD player. So, and what it does is it takes you stop by stop, and they have Wayne Mott, who is a historian and guide, who talks to you about.
He's the CEO of the National Civil War Museum in Harrisburg, PA.
Right. Yep.
Oh, and he was great. and at each stop he tells you about what happened there, tells you a story. So not just the high level, these are the regiments that fought, but even like the personal stories, the little things that took place. And it was so great. And then you get out and you can walk around with your kids and see the things and touch the place. And it was really, I'm glad we did that. Next time, I think we'll get the guide and do it again like that. Also, if you go to Gettysburg, we had to miss it because we had to leave a day early because it was just too darn hot to stick around any longer. So we missed going to what we had planned to do, was the Eisenhower farm. Dwight D. Eisenhower, when he
loved Gettysburg.
Yeah, he did as a soldier, and he bought a farm in Gettysburg, which during his presidency was the summer home, with like Camp David is, or actually like some presidents today have places that they go to during the summer for vacation. That was, and then he retired there afterward, and then upon his death, gave it to the National Park Service, and you can take tours there. We missed it, so that's one of the reasons we have to go back, because I would love to see it. So that's what I would suggest is some sort of one of these guide things. Either hire a guide or get the CD guide.
Dom, I just have to really just fun fact here. My grandfather was a Pennsylvania State Police officer, and basically from like 1952 to 77, I think, somewhere in there.
Right.
And we have a picture of him. I guess the word on the street was whenever Ike would come to Gettysburg, he loved the PA State Police so much that he would have them do his security detail instead of the Secret Service. So there's a picture of him campaigning, and you see him, and like you see the poster of him and Nixon on the front of it, and he's standing up there giving a speech, and right in front of the podium, down like below the stage, is my grandfather, like with the other state police. So that's just a cool. Yeah, he got to meet him a few times. Yeah, it was kind of cool. Yeah, down in Gettysburg.
I like Ike. Let's talk a little bit about some of the resources people can, if they don't have a chance to go to a battlefield, some of the resources that people can refer to. And Jim, let's start with your resource. You have a website that you have that people might want to check out. What is your website?
My website is teachthecivilwar.com. It sort of started off of my doctoral dissertation. I started finding all these resources, and then I just started sharing it. But what I do there is I teach some things, but I also show you how you can explore historical images, or how you can use Google Earth or Google Maps to explore the Civil War. So, you talk about doing things like you doing that tour with your kids. So if you're going to do the tour of any battlefield, go try to find some original images, print them out, or have them on an iPad or a device. And then you can say, look, that picture was taken right in this exact spot. And kids get, that's sort of little things like that you can do with your kids. And that's sort of what I teach about, or I'll tell a story about, somebody important or some event, and how we can learn more about it and look beyond just this unit fought at this particular spot kind of thing. Right. Which is what Wayne does in his thing. It's not just about, the 1st Minnesota did this, but it's about the human interest stories behind that.
Right. Yeah, that was the thing that really captured their attention, is the stories of the brothers who are on opposite sides of the battlefield, or the general, the Union general who had his leg shot off.
Jan Sickles.
Sickles, right, whose leg was on just. He would go visit his leg in what was the National Archives or something. The bone
I might too.
Yeah.
I mean, just like they love those individual stories that really capture them. So what other good resources would there be? Like, I would say the Ken Burns Civil War documentary for me has been a good resource. And I haven't seen it in years, but that Gettysburg movie, I recall being good, and it's on my list. I need to watch it again soon. What would you recommend for a good resource?
That's I've always enjoyed the Gettysburg movie. I mean, it was a big deal when they were filming it around here, obviously too, because they filmed. I don't think they filmed. I don't want to say all of it, maybe all of it, but certainly most of it there. And they went through they had to do a lot of efforts to kind of make things look like they did at the time and everything, and putting straw down on certain streets and stuff, like really trying to do a good job of masking the passage of time. But I was trying to think if I could run down the hall, and I didn't quite have enough time to, so I don't have the title. I apologize. Maybe I can put it in what I send to you, Dom, and you can. But there's a book. I just remember using. I know like James McPherson has a lot of stuff. Like it's been a while, but I think his Ordeal by Fire is like in its 4th edition now or something. So I had it years ago. So it's So that's a pretty in-depth book. There's a great Lincoln biography too, like a couple biographies that are good to look at. You know, him and Grant and some others that you can just really get if you're interested in those, you know, figures, of course, because you see, like I said earlier, and you know, all those those relationships, you know, especially with those guys who some of the leaders, which I personally find really fascinating. But then on kind of the less famous side of it, in a sense. The book I'm saying, I can't remember the title of, but I'll get it later. There's several of them too, compilations of letters, you know, correspondence between, you know, soldiers and family back home. That kind of thing can be really enlightening and also a little depressing, quite frankly, when you read how 20-year-olds wrote in like 1860 versus like how some of my, you know, like how college students write today. It can be a little, that's a general statement, but sometimes it's like, oh my, you know, I think we've lost a little something there. But you know, sometimes it's very poetic and flowery and all that. But you get a lot of neat insight into that. You know, like what did these guys think about what was going on? You know, you'll see that in there. It's really interesting.
Was there a guy? Was it Jeff? Was it Scarra who wrote
Jeff
a series?
Scarra, he wrote The Killer Angels.
Shara. Right.
Shara.
Yeah,
was it Michael? I think Michael Shara wrote Killer Angels, and Jeff's his son, and he's continued on writing others
That's what
as
it
well.
Is. I've read Jeff's books, the Civil War books. And then Michael, he's the dad who wrote the Pulitzer Prize winner on the Civil War. And I saw people recommending those as well. Have either of you read those?
They're good, yeah. I mean, Gettysburg, the movie Gettysburg is based very closely to Michael Shara's, you know, Killer Angels.
Okay.
As its sort of source, I think, for a lot of the way it's framed. If I remember correctly, I'm trying to remember the title. It was Gods and Generals. Jeff Shara wrote, I think, and then they made that into a film. But it was a little weird. It was good, but it was 10 years after the Gettysburg movie came out, and some of the actors from Gettysburg were in it playing themselves from a year or two before Gettysburg takes place.
Oh, okay.
So overall, I thought it was okay, but you know, I mean.
Sort
Jeff
of a prequel.
Daniels is but it's like, well, yeah, but Jeff Daniels clearly weighs like 20 pounds more than he did 10. You know, and I'm not knocking him, but it's also like that was a little tricky, I thought, just from a movie standpoint. But that one covers more from right at the beginning of the war up until Gettysburg.
So that's
it's also a little confusing because you've got like Stephen Lang, who played Pickett in Gettysburg, plays Stonewall Jackson.
Oh, okay.
And he does a great job, but that things like that can be a little tough if you know the Gettysburg movie first.
Don't watch them back to back. Yeah,
no, maybe not. Yeah.
So Gods and Generals.
Interesting side note. My daughter and I actually took part in the filming of Gods and Generals.
Oh, really? No way.
We were at Harper's Ferry, West Virginia.
Oh, very cool. Yeah.
Got to meet Jeff Daniels and Mara Sorvino. I think that's what it was.
That's awesome.
Got to say hello to them. We took part in a couple of scenes. But it was really cool to be part of the filming of that movie.
That is so cool.
That is.
Well, and honestly, no offense to Martin Sheen, but I personally thought that Robert Duvall, I thought, played a better Lee than that's just my opinion. But I thought I think he looked a little more like him too. But both, I thought, very good portrayals of Robert E. Lee. You know, for what it's worth.
Well, Robert Duvall does a better Southern accent, so.
Yeah, that's true. So a good movie that you might want to check out, Dom, is Glory, which is about the 54th Massachusetts.
Yes. I saw that many years ago. Mm-hmm. Wonderful movie. Yes.
Yeah, it's a really good movie about them. So
good recommendation.
Well, and again, like a little, I don't know if it depends on the crowd, but when I mentioned Gods and Generals, or no, mentioned Gangs of New York earlier. If only from the standpoint of, and again, I'm not speaking for the accuracy of everything in it per se, but there are so many. You have a lot of these movies like Civil War movie equals a movie about this battle, like Dom was saying earlier. It's interesting to see a little window into what are some of the other things going on other places back home, places in this case in New York, where it's not, oh, hey, wait, everybody wasn't totally on, the side of the Union in New York. What? So I thought it was interesting, at least, if nothing else, from that standpoint of shedding a little light on the riots that rose up there, that a lot of the guys from New York, coming home from Gettysburg had to go deal with that,
Interesting, yeah.
Which is just, you're not even be able to, as if it's not bad enough,
right.
What you've just been through, you have to go home, and that's what, is going on in the middle of your city,
Okay,
so it's crazy.
Let me throw one out there that I don't want you to laugh at me now, because this might be a laughable suggestion. But what about there was an old miniseries from 1985. You probably know what I'm about to say. North and South. Is it
just say no?
Okay.
I've never seen it, so I don't know. I'm well aware of it.
I only know of it, and I know people who they loved it. But I sometimes feel like they loved it not because of its historical accuracy, but because Patrick Swayze, is in it. That sort of thing.
Great hair.
It was such an all-star cast. I mean, it was everybody was in it from the time, but not recommended as a Civil War movie resource.
Yeah. So there's some good resources out there on the web if you're interested. I'm a big fan of the Library of Congress that has tons of primary source images and primary source documents and maps that you can look at. Just to start getting, like you talked about that, like the Sullivan Ballou letter where he wrote the letter to his wife, and one of the most famous ones. And you can look at sheet music and anything that you just about want is all out there. It's been digitized, and you can explore it and see how they wrote and what letters they wrote and compare and contrast points of view of different things. And another good general overview is the Civil War Trust. It's called battlefields.org. Has some great resources that you can use to learn more about different battles and different aspects of the Civil War as well.
Okay, that's awesome. That'll be so. Those are some great resources. I think at least to get people started, and of course your website, Jim, that would be another resource for folks, especially if you're homeschooling even, or you want to share with your kids, or just learn something for yourself. So those are some great resources. And if you think of any more after we're done, I'll put them in the show notes, and you can go to our website at sqpn.com and find all of the resources that we've mentioned there. I want to kind of wrap things up, and but before we do, we have our picks of the week coming up. Before we do that, let's get our message. We want to take a quick break and thank our patrons and make it possible for us to create Let's Talk, including this week we're thanking by name Patricia V, Michael A, Eric M, Mario L, and Earl P. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue Let's Talk and all the shows we do at StarQuest. You can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. I also want to recommend that if you're interested in the topic of history, you check out our new podcast, American Catholic History, at sqpn.com/history. Every week, Tom and Noel Crow, they do a short podcast, 8-10 minutes at the most, where they talk about one little bit of Catholic history, a story. This week, they did Newt Rockne and how he was converted. He was not Catholic, but he's one of the greatest football coaches in college football history, was a coach at Notre Dame, but wasn't Catholic, but was converted through the witness of his players. And it's a great story there. They've already done, and that's only the 7th episode so far, and such acclaim. People loving this podcast. They've had ones on Danny Thomas and on Bishop Patrick Minogue, the former gold miner in California who became a bishop of Sacramento. Just some great stories. So check it out. American Catholic History, sqpn.com/history, or find it on any podcast directory like Apple Podcast. So as we do every week on Let's Talk, we do a pick of the week. Hopefully you've got something that you want to share with us. And why don't we start with Jim? Why don't we let you go first with your pick of the week?
Oh, okay. Can I do two?
Yes, of course.
So I just got a review copy not too long ago of a book called The War Outside My Window.
Uh-huh.
It's by Janet Kroon, and it's a diary of Leroy Grisham, who was part of a slaveholding family in Georgia, and it's really a good book about the Civil War and secession and slavery and that sort of thing. So it's a really interesting read. I'm enjoying that one. And the other one is if you're going to tour Gettysburg, I highly recommend a book called The Complete Gettysburg Guide by J. David Petruzzi, Petruzzi. And the reason why I recommend it, it's a great overview of the battle, and lots of graphics, lots of detailed maps. And in the back of the book, there's a cool place where you can go and find some things that are off the beaten path, like where soldiers had gone back and carved their name into a rock, that you can go find those locations and little things like that. Or he'll line up some pictures or some off the beaten, like you probably didn't see it, but there's a cannon upside down inside along one of the sidewalks. Why is that there? It's called Penelope, and why is it there? So little things like that inside that book. If you're going to go, it's worth the $20 or whatever the book costs to get, just to if you're going to be walking around Gettysburg.
That's a great idea. Yeah. Before we go back, I'm gonna have to pick that up, and because it's great to give kids things to look for that they can connect with at a place. Yeah. That's
right. So we actually, I have videos on my website that my kids will take that book, and then my kids will read a section from it. So like there's a video of my son Christopher reading about the Daughters of Charity from that book on my YouTube channel. So, again, it's just, we can share back, but it's how do you do that? And there's, where you can see bullet holes in there and all that's inside of that book. It's really cool.
Awesome. Thank you. Those are two great picks. How about you, Mike? What is your pick of the week?
Well, I have to cheat, too, because I have two also. Mainly because the one I ran and grabbed it when I got a second earlier to do it. So the one I was thinking of, it's an older book. It's the edition I have is from '94, but it's a James McPherson little volume called "What They Fought For," that he reviewed, I think 1,000, the correspondence of 1,000 different Union and Confederate soldiers to try to get a sense of what they fought for, hence the title. Mm-hmm. So that's a really good one. And again, it's short. It's only maybe a little over 100 pages or so, the version I have. And that, again, I think there's so much there to really resonate with, as far as, especially for kids, I think, to some extent. I don't think they could read this, maybe, might not be okay for, younger kids, but to try to get that sense across that this is, these were people like us, that had families and hopes and dreams and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
So I think that can get that across. If I may, real quick, along that same line, when I mentioned earlier about my program I was studying in college, one of the best stories I liked about the guy I focused on, who was Colonel John Mosby. It was a Confederate partisan warfare chief, and after the war, and he and his guys, just caused a ruckus behind Union lines for most of the war, and it was just a really interesting story. So I can share more on that later. So look him up. But he became friends, of all people, with Ulysses S. Grant after the war. And by the end of his life, he's talking to Grant when he's president. He helped him campaign for president. He says to him at one point, or Grant tells Mosby, rather, he says, at one point there was a train, such and such a train I was on, that you guys almost captured. And Mosby just laughs. He's like, wow, things would have been different. Maybe I'd be sitting in your chair and you'd be like, my buddy. And he said when Grant died, he felt like his best friend in the world had died.
Wow.
So you see those incredible stories that, you can't imagine it, But my main pick of the week, just real quick, is I'm kind of working my way through it. Faith and Fury: The Rise of Catholicism During the Civil War by it's Father Charles Connor. He's down at Mount St. Mary's, and so he's a Civil War historian. And it just came out in June. And there was a great interview with him on Al Cresta's show a couple days ago. I think it was August 1st if people want to check it out. But he really went through that and talked about, some of the criticism, of why weren't more bishops working with abolitionists. And it's like, well, a lot of abolitionists were great, but also really anti-Catholic.
Right.
Right. And so he really, that book really, it's less than 300 pages, not super long, but he goes into a lot of neat detail about the dynamics of the lead up to the war and the average Catholic's sort of life in the North and the South. So that's a good one that just came out.
That's awesome. Sounds good.
So, yeah.
Excellent. Thank you both for those picks. Those are Civil War related picks, on topic as expected. Mine is not on topic. I leave it to the experts to pick the stuff on the topic. I have picked, of all things, a coffee mug. I am a huge coffee addict.
Yes.
And
same here.
The mug, people don't realize a mug is a very important part of drinking coffee. It has to be the right kind of mug. It can't be too thick to the sides. It has to be big enough to hold enough coffee. So I always buy a mug when I go places, and I bought it last year. I bought a mug when I was on vacation. This great mug from Acadia, and my daughter knocked it off of the counter a few months ago, and I was devastated. It was a really heartbreaking moment. So I had to go out and buy a new mug. So I am going to recommend this mug that I picked up. This is a Star Wars Join the Rebellion Rogue Squadron mug. Okay,
nice.
It is
I
20
have an R2D2
ounces.
one.
Yeah. So this one doesn't have R2D2. But it's a recruiting poster. So sort of, rebellion a little bit.
Yeah.
Although, wait a
there you
minute.
go.
That's the wrong side. Never mind.
I guess
that makes
the
the
Confederates of the
makes the North into the Empire. Now, forget that. I'll rewind. But anyway, it's a great mug. It's 20 ounces. That is a lot of coffee. I got to tell
really
you.
is.
That's why I had one at lunch, and I'm like wired still at 10 o'clock at night. So, I'll put a link to it. It's on Amazon. It's actually really a great mug, and I really enjoy drinking out of it. And plus, it's a Star Wars mug, and what's not to love about that? So, all right. Well, thank you both so much for talking about this with me. I knew we would have a great discussion about this.
This is fun.
Yeah, I went to Gettysburg and I was blown away by the experience, and I wanted to share that with more people. And I think it's something more people we need to learn about the Civil War and the War of Independence too. Frankly, we need to learn our history, know our history, and so that we don't, in some cases, repeat our history, or recover that which was great about our history at that time.
George Santayana.
Exactly. And
that's how I started my doctoral dissertation. It's actually the first sentence of my doctoral dissertation is those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it.
Right. Yep. And I do believe in the corollary, which is if you don't remember the past, you may also repeat it. Or no, that wasn't it. No, you learn the lessons of the past, of the positive things that happened so you can repeat those things, like our war for independence. So, regardless, I do want to thank you both for being here. Folks, we want to hear from you. What do you think of this topic? What do you think of, have you been to a Civil War battlefield? Have you enjoyed it? What are some tips you have? What places did you go that you enjoyed? Are you going to go now that you've listened to this? We want to hear your feedback. So you can do that by visiting sqpn.com or our Facebook page at facebook.com/StarQuestMedia, or you can send us an email to letstalk@sqpn.com. No apostrophes, please. Find the links to everything we discussed, all the books, the movies, and everything like that in our picks of the week on our website at sqpn.com/letstalk. Until next time, Jim Bigley, thank you for joining me on Let's Talk.
You're quite welcome, sir. Nice being back.
Excellent. Yes. Mike Creevy, thank you as well.
Yeah, thank you, Dom. Thanks so much.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to Let's Talk on StarQuest.